so much. I'm very happy to be with you today and to share you more, history of background about the book I'm going to present you, and which was published in French. So for those of you who don't speak French, so it will give you an overview today in English of the content of this book. First of all, this study started a long time ago, and it's a kind of project that began, when I was working on my PhD with, as Anna mentioned, was dedicated to French luxury goods and decorative arts in Russia in the 19th century and early 20th century. And I discovered that Olga Paley and her husband, Grand Duke Paul of Russia, were both collectors and spent a lot of time, over 10 years, in Paris in the early 20th century. So they were part of my study as a very interesting example of this French-Russian artistic connection in the early 20th century. But the amount of material I found about this specific story while I was working on my PhD told me immediately this will need to be published as a book afterwards. And here it is, was published in French in 2018. And just to give you a sense, I mean, many of the documentation and archives I found are in France, in private hands, but also in Russia and here in the US, including the Russian History Museum in Journonville. And I'm very thankful to Michael to have opened the door to me and having given me access to some of these documents. But the main discovery I did in the Russian archives was actually the complete set, about several volumes of the personal diary of Olga Paley, which was written between 1902 and 1914, partly in Russian, partly in French, and which I believe has never been seen before I looked at it. For those of you who might be, familiar with the Russian archives, when you order a document to look at it in the reading room, you have to sign a piece of paper. And so you can see who read actually or saw these documents before yourself. And for all of these diaries, I was the only one who saw them since they were recorded in the 50s of the 20th century. So it was a wonderful discovery, which was like depicting an everyday life of, this couple, unusual couple of Olga Paley and Grand Duke Paul of Russia. And here you have a portrait. I will tell you more about it later on. It's at the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, featuring actually Olga Paley in 1908 while in Paris. So let's start this presentation with more background about our two figures that I will present you today. First, let's start with Olga Paley. She had many names. Olga was born in an aristocratic family in Russia in 1865, the Karlovich family. And she married in 1884 Erich von Pistolkors. The photo on the left is her husband. She married in 1884, who was a member of the Russian aristocracy. He was an officer in the Russian army, and the photo you can see on the left actually is in the archives of the Russian History Museum. And here you can see, so that's a second name of Olga Paley, signing this photo on the right from 1896, Olga the Pistolkors. So as a wife of Erich von Pistolkors. Pistolkors was hired in 1894 as the aide-de-camp to Grand Duke Vladimir of Russia, the brother of Grand Duke Paul, a brother of Alexander III, an uncle of Nikolai II. And as such, Olga became introduced to the circle of the imperial court around Grand Duke Vladimir, and the couple started also to travel abroad with Grand Duke Vladimir and Grand Duke Vladimir, who used to spend a lot of time in Paris and abroad. So that's how Olga became quite, known around the imperial circles. Here is a portrait of Olga, a painting which is not known, has never been published. It's a portrait done in 1886 by the famous painter Konstantin Makovsky, who was really a very fashionable painter at court in the late 19th century, worked a lot for the imperial family. This portrait is in a private collection and features her 2 years after her wedding. As you can see, most likely she's pregnant here. She will have actually with Erich von Pistolkors 3 children. And as you can see, she's one of the beauties of St. Petersburg in the late 19th century. But at that time, another charming figure in the imperial circle was, of course, Grand Duke Paul of Russia. You can see him here on the left. Paul was the son of Alexander II and Empress Maria Alexandrovna. He was the youngest child of the family, and he married in 1889 with Princess Alexandra of Greece, who died in 1891, giving birth to her second child, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich. So he was a young widower, lover of theater, music, actor. He loved theater. He was himself like playing actor sometimes. And so they were both, Olga, the pistol course, one pistol course, and Paul of Russia, mingling together in the same imperial circles. And they fell in love clearly, and they began a love affair. What I like about these two photos, both of these photos are kept in the family, in a private collection, in the family album. They are next to each other. As you can see on the photo on the left of Grand Duke Paul, it's signed Pavel, and it's dated 1893, and it's written Tsarskoye Selo, so this elegant location city in the suburb of St. Petersburg. And on the right, you have a photo of Olga, pistol course, and there is an inscription in Russian, which is actually a love dedication coming from a text by Alexei Apurtin, which was a famous love song by Tchaikovsky, very in trend at that time. And we know from the correspondence which has survived between both of them in the Russian archives that they first not met, but fell in love or began their relationship in 1893 and in Tsarskoye Selo. So I just like the fact that these two photos are still today connected to that, first connection between both of them and in the family album today. So this love affair was, of course, discreet and not public. I will say it's not the first time that, a member of the imperial family had affairs outside, with married women. And but until this was kept kind of secretly and sort of like tolerated until 1897. And that year is a very important year in the history of this couple because it's the year when their first child was born, Prince Vladimir. You can see a picture taken a few years later, 1904, 1905 on the right, which is from a private collection from the family albums. And on the left, the same year when Grand Duke Paul began father again, he's portrayed here on this wonderful portrait by Valentin Serov, which is at the Tretyakov Gallery from 1897. So that same year, a child. So that became a real issue in this couple because the child was a proof of this sort of official proof of this relationship. So very quickly, the couple didn't want to separate themselves. They wanted to stay together. They wanted to get married. It was several issues. First of all, yes, Grand Duke Paul was a widower, but Olga was still married. Olga was from the aristocracy, so she was not from royal blood, and she was most likely still married. So both, especially Grand Duke Paul, began to negotiate with the emperor, Nikolai II. The situation was really quite complicated. The imperial family was strongly against this relationship, and especially the idea of a wedding between both of them, especially the emperor, the empress Alexandra. Grand Duke Sergei, the brother of Grand Duke Paul, was really, really against that situation, and the same for his wife, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, sister of Empress Alexandra. So the situation was very complicated, and also the last similar situation happened in 1891 when Grand Duke Mikhail Mikhailovich married Sofia von Merenberg, and Alexander III was then the emperor, and he was very strong against him, and he had to live in exile. So Grand Duke Paul and Olga knew what would happen if they decided to get married. So what they decided to do was to negotiate so that she could get divorced, but then Paul gave his word to the emperor, to his uncle, that he will never marry her. So she would be free, but they wouldn't get married. So finally, eventually, the divorce was authorized by the emperor. Olga so was free. She left Russia to for a long travel away from St. Petersburg, and right after she left, actually, Grand Duke Paul left as well, and they joined. They met together in 1902. In Livorno in Italy, and there they get secretly married at the Greek church. Of course, it was a huge scandal within the imperial family, especially because Grand Duke Paul didn't respect his word, and also everyone found out that they had planned everything in advance. A few sometimes before actually the divorce and the marriage, Paul had sent abroad a large part of his fortune, over 3 million rubles, which was a lot of money at that time, to Germany, so that he will be able to live abroad with a fortune. And so they had to live in exile. Paul lost his titles, his position at court, and the custody of his children was given to Grand Duke Sergei and Elizabeth. And so the couple left Russia and traveled abroad for several months, doing a sort of like honeymoon together between Germany, Italy, and finally Paris. And seeing that the situation would not evolve in a good way for now for them, they decided actually to settle in Paris, where they had to live in exile. And that happened, the settling in Paris around 1904. They rented an apartment on Avenue d'Iéna, not so far from the Eiffel Tower, the Trocadero Square in Paris. And Grand Duke Paul got a title for Olga. She became Countess de Hohenfelsen. This title was a German title that she received from the Bavarian court. And in 1904, that's how she was introduced to the high society in Paris. Her photo was published in this very fashionable newspaper, Les Modes, in 1904, and here she is as Comtesse de Hohenfelsen in December 1904. It is true that they had already, Grand Duke Paul and Olga, a lot of connection in Paris before they settled there. They had traveled before to France. They had many friends there. Also, Grand Duke Paul was had connection, political connection, because at that time, the French-Russian alliance was very strong, and being Russian and a member of the imperial family was very important for French people at that time. And I would say there was a sort of curiosity around this couple in Paris, and they became very, very fashionable. The couple will make all the headlines. You will follow their life every day in the newspapers, knowing where they will go, where they will do, and so on. So first of all, the family grew in Paris, and they had two daughters, respectively born in 1903 and 1905, so Irene and Natalie. You can see them here in Paris, on the left with their older brother, Vladimir, and on the right with their father, Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich. So the family grew. They began to develop a very large circle of friends, and they were part of the high society life of Paris. And they will be invited by many locals and also attend many activities in salons and meeting with artists and all the cultural life of Paris of the period. And one of the salons they visited was actually the Salon of Madeleine Lemaire. Madeleine Lemaire was a very influential woman at that time. She was a painter, quite successful in Russia, known for her watercolor of flowers. She was a very close friend, actually, of Marcel Proust, and all of her circle was actually part of the high society of Paris, who inspired actually Marcel Proust for his monumental work In Search of Lost Time and À la recherche du temps perdu. And what's quite interesting is that Countess Olga of Hohenfelsen is mentioned by Marcel Proust in Search of Lost Time, and she's mentioned only once, but as a friend of Madame de Guermantes. And what's really great is like when you read her everyday life and her personal diaries, you understand that she knew and met and mingled with all the figures in Paris at that time who inspired Marcel Proust for his work. And that's really also what's interesting in reading her diaries. Like you can see the real Paris that inspired Marcel Proust. And here you have a painting by Madeleine Lemaire showing actually her salon in the beginning of the 20th century, where Olga went several times. And actually in her diary in 1910, she said, quote, "Tonight, I went to Madeleine Lemaire, where it's always joyful and beautiful, but there are too many people." And that's exactly what the reputation of this salon was, that there were too many guests and too many people, but you could meet, writers, politicians, musicians, artists, and so on. And so while in Paris, Olga of Hohenfelsen decided to commission her portrait. And she chose this artist, Pascal Dagnan-Bouvray, who was a quite successful artist from the realist movement. And he was known for doing many, portraits of art lovers and from the patrons of the Parisian cultural circle. And so in 1908, she will go very often, among many of her different activities, to the studio of the artist. She will sit over 60 times. So that's what you learn by reading, the diary, that she will go very often there. Sometimes friends will come in and they will discuss and all of that. So 60 times she sat for this wonderful portrait, which is now at the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. And the artist was so happy with this painting that he decided to show it twice in 1908, once at a private exhibition, Le Cercle de l'Union Artistique, an artistic union. And of course, the painting made the headlines, and the newspaper reported about that painting saying, quote, "People are gathering around the portrait of a ravishing woman by Mr. Dagnan-Bouvray. Who is she? Her name is whispered. Why shouldn't we share the name? It's a portrait of the Countess of Hohenfelsen, the wife of Grand Duke Paul, who we know lives in Paris." End of quote. So it just shows you that people were intrigued by this Russian woman, the story behind this couple, behind this morganatic marriage. And again, the painting was shown a second time in 1908, this time at the Salon, where it was the only work that Dagnan-Bouvray showed this year in Paris. As you can see from this wonderful portrait, Olga von Hohenfelsen was really fashionable. She was known for her taste, for her dresses, she's wearing here a fur. She has this amazing pearl necklace and this pendant as a devant de corsage or stomacher that she's wearing. And she is known also for having enjoyed the luxury goods produced in Paris. And on a regular basis, she would actually do shopping, and she will actually go to Paris on a regular, she was living there, but she will go to Rue de la Paix, sorry. Here's like this amazing photo showing her as a fashion victim, as you can see. And here she will go very often to the Rue de la Paix, which was the hub of the luxury good industry in Paris, where you could find fashion designers, couturiers, shoemakers, antique dealers, jewelers, and so on. And she is really described for sure as a jewelry fanatic, jewelry fanatic, and she will sometimes go several times the same day to Cartier, or several times a week for sure, sometimes meeting there with friends to look at what was new, to bring jewelry to be clean, reset, changed, to buy new jewelry. And let's look closely at this photograph here. This photograph was taken in 1912 for an event, which was a costume ball organized by the Ethiope family in Paris on the theme of Eastern Europe. So here she's wearing an Hungarian costume, supposedly, and she's wearing most of her jewelry. She had more, but part of it is worn here, all made by Cartier, especially the tiara you can see on the top right from the Cartier archives, which had different pendants of diamonds, the central one being over 27 carats, and the total weight of these pendant diamonds of over 120 carats. And as you can see, these tiara commissioned first in 1908 and then reset in 1911, actually very similar in a way to the famous tiara that was owned by Grand Duchess Vladimir. She could wear it as a stomacher or devant de corsage, as seen on this photo from 1912. And the devant de corsage on the bottom of this slide with diamonds and natural pearls, look at the size of these amazing natural pearls, was also worn as a headdress here on this photo. And this photo, as I said, was taken by Boissonnas and Taponnier, which was a very fashionable photographer whose studio was Place Vendôme, so not far from, the luxury good shops and boutiques. On this photo, she's not only wearing her favorite Cartier jewelry, which had headquarters in Rue de la Paix since 1899. She's also wearing a dress by Worth. Worth was this famous fashion designer who was located since the mid-19th century on Rue de la Paix as well. And she was a great client of Worth. And in his memoir, he even published this photo of her wearing his dress, and as an example of all the creation he did for the Russian court. She was not only the client of she was client of Cartier, but also other jewelers, Worth, and other fashion designer, including Paquin. And here is actually a painting by Jean Béraud, which is at the Carnavalet Museum in Paris from 1907, showing the end of the day at Paquin. The seamstresses are actually leaving the shop of Paquin, and you can see on the top here the name of Paquin. Paquin was a woman who, a fashion designer who became very, very famous in the late 19th century, very successful and working for the high society all over the world. And of course, Olga was a great client of Paquin. She would go to this atelier on a regular basis. She would spend hours to choose new models, to try them on, to select other colors and all of that. And sometimes she will share in her diary how long that takes, 6 hours, how tired she is of all this time spent at the atelier of her favorite couturier. So Paris was also a wonderful, known for the food, known for the entertainment, and Olga and Paul both were definitely enjoying the Parisian life, and they will attend, many restaurants. And here you have an example of Prunier, who was specialized in oysters and caviar, and they will go there on a regular basis, especially after the theater or after the opera. And these restaurants still exist. They will they were theater lovers. They will go several times a week to the theater. Olga will write down, her comments about what she saw, the performances, and so on. So it's really, when you read that diary, and what I try to do in my book is really to bring that world alive, and you are really following her during the day, from shopping to theater and art exhibition. So speaking of life offered in Paris in the early 20th century, another aspect of their life was, of course, entertaining. So they will not only be, received by the high society in Paris, they will also give dinners, parties, afternoons in their house. First, the apartment they rented became too small, not only because of the social life they had now, but also because of the growth of the family. And here, to illustrate the entertaining they did in Paris, I wanted to show you this piece. It's a houseboat from a service made for Paul Alexandrovich, which is at Hillwood in our collection. So in 1905, they decided to buy a new home. And this was this building you can see on this postcard, which had already had a Russian history, because originally that building was built for Princess Zinaida Yusupova, and I will talk a lot about that in my next book. But this building, so from the mid-19th century, was owned by her, and when she died in 1893, went to the Yusupov family, who finally sold it. And in 1905, Grand Duke Paul and Olga bought this building, and they refurbished it completely and added also some spaces. So here you can see a plan, a floor plan of the building, of the layout of the first floor with all the drawing rooms and entertaining spaces. This is a permit signed by Countess Olga de Hohenfelsen from the French archives. And on the other side, the permit is here. On the other side, you can see it here on the picture. So that's what they built. It was a new space for the staff and also for guest rooms and a garage for the cars. And that was built around 1908 while they were refurbishing the interior of the building, which is now a private school in Boulogne in the suburb of Paris. So the interiors have survived. It's actually the only trace we have of the decor, the inside decor, which had been commissioned from or supervised by George Henschel. Henschel was one of the most fashionable interior designers. They hired to create this 18th century inspired style for this mansion in the suburb of Paris. And the vestibule has survived, as you can see on this slide, with some allegorical sculptures and the monogram of the Grand Duke and Olga of Hohenfelsen. And this is, this detail of her sitting exactly here in this vestibule of the mansion they owned in the suburb of Paris. You can sometimes have the opportunity to visit that space. And here's like on the first floor, the large drawing room in the French 18th century style. The paneling dates to the period of Olga de Hohenfelsen and Grand Duke Paul in the Louis XVI style, so designed by George Henschel. This is a drawing room where they will host dinner when they had a large number of guests, because a formal dining room was quite small. And here you have a detail of the actual dining room and two menus on each side. You can read in French these fancy, courses. And actually, we have some records and memoirs from people of the time who were, guests at Olga de Hohenfelsen and Grand Duke Paul, who really enjoyed the food and loved the kitchen, the cuisine that was served during these evenings at Boulogne. And the largest room for entertainment was the Grand Salon, or large drawing room, which is now the library of this private school. And the paneling, again, inspired by Versailles, is the work of George Henschel. And this is where, in a decor inspired by the 18th century, you had the performance of different artists coming to the mansion at Boulogne, such as Reynaldo Hahn, another connection to Marcel Proust. He was a very close friend to him, and there is a large correspondence in the Russian archive between Hahn and Olga de Hohenfelsen, and he will perform here at play his music at in this drawing room. And also they will invite some Russian artists during the Russian seasons in Paris. And here you have a photo of Fedor Chalyapin and his team while visiting Paris in 1913 for the first Russian season organized by Diaghilev. And they will also perform in the same drawing room for Olga de Hohenfelsen and Grand Duke Paul. And of course, this was furnished with 18th century furniture from the collection of Olga and Paul. And this collection you could also see in the study of Grand Duke Paul. This is how it looks now. It's actually an office of the director of this private school. The design here was very English inspired from the late 18th century regarding the inspiration, and very similar to some of the interior design that Charles Cameron had created for many palaces in Russia during the reign of Catherine the Great. And especially in Tsarskoye-Selo, and as we know, they both, fell in love in Tsarskoye-Selo. Grand Duke Paul was born in Tsarskoye-Selo, so that was most likely a way for him to, keep the memory of Russia. And the walls were decorated with part of their collection, which included actually family portraits. And on the right, you can see a portrait of Alexander I by George Doe from the 1820s, whose whereabouts is unknown, which we know hung in this study until the 1910s. So let's move to collecting. Another, joy of being in Paris is to enjoy the art market and to have access to all these art, be antiques or contemporary arts that both were collecting. And here I show you a Sèvres piece from the Hillwood collection, which once was part of the Hohenfelsen collection. So let's start with Grand Duke Paul and his taste before he actually met Olga. So here's an example of the painting he acquired in his youth in the late 19th century while traveling abroad. He will buy art from Bousseau-Valadon, mostly from this very famous art dealer who worked also for his brothers, especially Alexander III. So he was really interested in academic art, academic painting, as his brothers were as well at that same period. This painting here is actually a painting by Francois Flammore, a French painter, showing one part of the life of Napoleon Bonaparte, you can see here. And Flammore was quite famous for his paintings inspired by the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. And he was quite famous in Russia as well. He traveled to Russia, did a lot of portraits there of Empress Maria Feodorovna, Princess Ksenia Alexandrovna, and so on, and the Yusupovs as well. And later, actually, Nicholas II will even have a series of paintings by him featuring the life of Napoleon Bonaparte, which were in the Winter Palace in the Empire-style drawing room, which are still at the State Hermitage now. And this painting is now in a private collection, but was once part of Grand Duke Paul's collection. And he also had, and these paintings were first in his St. Petersburg Palace before being, for some of them, moved to Paris. And these photos are amazing. They are unknown. They were published for the first time in my book, some of them, and they are from an album which is at the Russian History Museum in Jordanville, which is an album most likely done around 1889 when, at the time of the marriage of Grand Duke Paul to his first wife, Princess Alexandra of Greece. And this is the interior of his former palace in St. Petersburg, which was the former Stieglitz Palace. And here you can see some of the treasures that he had already, like this George Doe portrait featuring Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, and that's where it was in his palace, which is now in the collection of the Queen of England. Here in the Grand Duke's study, a portrait of his father, Alexander II, by George Doe, which recently reappeared at Christie's in 2018 in London. And these paintings, actually, most likely, some of them he got from his mother, Empress Maria Alexandrovna, he inherited them from her. As you can see, the portrait of Alexander II, and another one, which was also part of Grand Duke Paul's collection, when they were in Maria Alexandrovna's study in Gatchina on this watercolor from 1874. But that taste, family portraits made perfect sense, but his taste for modern work or academic work was very early on criticized by Olga. In 1899, while she's actually traveling to Paris already and shopping, if I can say so, and going to antique dealers with friends there, she would write to Paul and say, "And when I think that you are spending this crazy amount of money for this modern work, when they are like all these marvels from the past, of course, a portrait by Lancret for 180,000 francs, but what a marvel. And paintings by Watteau, by Boucher, by Greuze," end of quote. So she's listing all this 18th century art, French art especially, which was so fashionable at that time and that she would see in Paris. And while Grand Duke Paul was actually collecting academic painting, French or Russian. And so she would change that, and they will start by actually antiques, starting with portraits, family portraits, or member of the imperial family, such as this portrait of Empress Catherine the Great, another version after Shibanov, which is a famous model which they bought in 1901 from a London dealer. On the right, a portrait of Empress Maria Feodorovna after Rollin, which is now in the Zuboff Foundation in Geneva, which was bought in 1913. This one is in the collection of the Queen of England. They also had Van Dyck that you can see here, which is now in a private collection. They bought a series of large painting by Hubert Robert, which is a must-have for a collector of 18th century art. And those two, you can see them here, are now at the Western Art Museum in Tokyo. The Chardin, which is one of the rare pieces from the collection, which is now kept in Russia at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, which is an attribute to the arts, makes perfect sense for these collectors. And that she bought in 1914. And here a sample of the porcelain, samples of the porcelain collection that was one of the great interest of Olga de Hohenfelsen, a piece with painting by Buffon, another one with this green background from the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, England, and our sauce boat from Sèvres, which is at Hillwood. The collection was also known for this collection of perfume bottles from the 18th century, some of them by Meissen or other manufacturers that were collected by Olga de Hohenfelsen. And those are now in a private collection in France, the Givaudan collection, the perfume firm. And these were collected by Olga de Hohenfelsen and have been on view at Hillwood a couple of years ago for a special exhibition. And they will also buy sometimes some historic furniture, especially if they had great provenance. And in 1914, they were able to acquire this piano by Tasquin, a very famous late 18th century piano maker. And at that time, it was believed that this piano belonged at one point to Queen Marie Antoinette. And in the diary of Olga, you can read how she does her tour of the antique dealer in Paris. And she says, I saw this Chardin painting I just showed you, and I saw this piano. And she ends by saying, quote, everything I want. And as often, she will go back the following day with the Grand-Duc Paul, and then they will buy everything. And I will say they increased their acquisitions in the late 1910s because at that time, their situation had changed a bit, and they were planning for furnishing a new home, but that time not in Paris, in Russia. Indeed, step by step, the couple was progressively forgiven and was able to reconnect with Russia and with the Russian imperial family. First in 1905, after the attack against Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, brother of Grand Duke Paul, and his death. So Paul was authorized to come back to Russia, got back his position and his ranks, but Olga was still forbidden to cross the border. Everything changed again in 1908 with the death of Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich, which happened in Paris, and both were authorized to come with the body to St. Petersburg in 1908. And starting from 1908, they had a plan to actually move back progressively to Russia, actually to have a home there where they could spend some of their time. Vladimir was going to go to the cadet school. The daughters from Olga, from her first marriage, had their first children, so she wanted to be close to them. So the idea was to build a new home and then to keep Paris for the fall, where they would plan to spend some weeks every year. And so they looked for a land, and they chose Tsarskoye Selo, again, where they met, where they fell in love, where Grand Duke Paul was born. And it was also a way to show that they were close to the power and that they were really back into the circle of the Russian imperial family. So here you have a photo of Tsarskoye Selo. That's a Catherine Palace from the 18th century. You can see it here. This is the Alexander Palace, where Nikolai II and Alexandra were living starting from 1905. And here is like the land where they bought a land from Alexander Polovtsov, on the top of which they built a new home. They hired for that an architect in St. Petersburg, but who was only executing the plans made in Paris. So the architect, very interestingly, is actually Karl Schmidt, who is mostly known for having built the Faberge shop on Bolshaya Morskaya in the late 19th century. And so he was only executing here a palace which was typically French, completely French in style and decor, and which has been completely designed in Paris by Olga and with her interior designer, Marcel Boulanger, who was quite famous at that time. And the palace was finished around 1914. They moved to Tsarskoye Selo in May 1914. They moved their entire collection to the palace at the same period. And as we know, in July 1914, outbreak of the First World War, and then later on, the Russian Revolution. After the revolution, the palace was transformed into a museum, and that's what you can see on the left. This is the front page of that little catalog, which states that even the nails were made in Paris for this palace. And I will just go through this palace, showing how it looked like when it was just finished, when they moved in May 1914. And here, just to illustrate how we could rebuild this whole decor, in the archives, all the drawings, models in France, many of them are kept, which was a mix between historic pieces from the collection and perfectly exact in style creation by the interior designer Marcel Boulanger. And here is a design by the French bronze maker Delisle for the light fixtures for the entrance of the palace. This is a gallery where you can again see the Delisle design for the lighting fixture, tapestry of the 18th century, the Chinese porcelain in these different cases, Russian hearthstone here. The study of the Grand Duke, with many of the paintings we have already seen, the Hubert Robert, the Chardin, many ceramics, bookcases. The library of the palace was really, really well known and really well, with a lot of rare material. Olga's study with, again, the Delisle design, her collection of 18th century perfume bottle, and here her piano by Tasca. The grand drawing room, which you can see everything was made in the French 18th century style. And here's a sample. What I circled here is about the silk, which was commissioned from Paris, from a home which still exists, Tassinari et Châtel, which is a very old silk factory, and they still have all the samples and all the records of all these commissions, which give you a sense of how these interiors looked like in 1914 when the family moved in. The main drawing room in the neoclassical style, again, the silk here as an example, how it looked like here, and one of the paintings we have seen. And the ballroom, as you can see, which was never really used due to the situation. And here it's actually taken from during the First World War, when Princess Olga Paley, because she got a new title, a new name in 1915, Olga Paley here, and her two daughters, among other members of the aristocracy working to help, the soldier during the First World War. And another room which was not really often used because of the situation is a dining room, which could host up to 40 guests. And here you have another aspect of the collection, how it looked like before the revolution, all these crystals from Russian crystals from the collection of Grand Duke Paul. And here is an example from the Hillwood collection, which we don't know if it came from that collection, but it's really identical to one piece we know was part of Grand Duke Paul's glass collection. So, and Maurice Paléologue, the French ambassador, who was invited for a dinner here at the time of the Russian Revolution, said in his memoir, just what will happen to all of these marvels and what will happen to this palace, which was brand new with this amazing collection. And before we go into this, just a detail about, not a detail, but more information about what happened to the family. So the palace, just to give you an example of the situation, how it evolved at the time of the war and then the Russian Revolution, was originally built to work with 64 staff members. In 1917, after the February Revolution, they had to cut down, and it moved to 48 staff members. After the October Revolution and when the Bolsheviks took over, it moved to 22 staff members. In July 1918, only 3 staff members, and in December 1918, none. At that time, the family had moved to the nearby cottage of Grand Duke Boris Vladimirovich, where they lived, while the palace had been confiscated, and they began the work of transforming it into a museum. And Olga Paley was actually involved in the arrangement and even the opening of the palace, her former house, and she even gave some tours to the first visitors. In the meantime, Grand Duke Paul was arrested and in 1919 executed. And Prince Paley was also arrested. It was among the members of the imperial family who were killed in 1918, in July 1918. So this tragic fate of the family was really terrible. And since she lost her husband, Olga left Russia. She was able to leave through Finland. She had already sent abroad her two daughters who left also through Finland. And the three of them actually lived in exile in Paris afterwards. Regarding the collection itself, so the museum opened as a museum dedicated to the art of France and French history, and all the inventories are kept in a Russian archive describing each object in detail, some of them being reproduced as these precious icons here, all the frames, little pieces, everything is described, some work by Faberge, as you can see here. Sometimes they will even draw the location in each case of all the pieces, so that how they inventorize everything. But then it was decided that the museum would be closed and that they would get rid of the collection. And so a large part of the collection was sold to an agent, Norman Weiss, who worked closely with the Bolshevik government. And he offered in different sales all of these objects in London in 1929. At that time, Olga Paley, who had escaped and who had saved some money by selling Boulogne, her house in a suburb of Paris, sued him and tried to get her object back, and she lost her trial. So that was a final, I will say, tragic event in her life, and she passed sometimes after the sales in 1929. And here it's one of the latest photos of her sitting in the London Christie's auction rooms playing at her piano that she would never get back. Other objects actually went through other paths and ended up in the US. And here I just wanted to show you a photo of Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, the stepdaughter of Olga Paley and the daughter of Grand Duke Paul. And she worked closely with Olga Paley in Paris after the revolution, where they together built and managed Kitmir, her embroidery, workshop. And she traveled to the US. And in her memoir, she mentioned how she found and saw some of the objects that belonged to her parents in a new gallery that just opened in New York. And I wonder if actually she saw the Hammer Gallery, where our clock, Faberge clock on the left, which belonged to Grand Duke Paul, came from and was acquired later by Marjorie Post. And as a connection again, in 1931, when Maria Pavlovna was in New York, she was invited for a reception and tea in her honor at Marjorie Post's New York apartment for a fundraiser. So that's basically what happened to the collection, sold abroad for a large part of it, and only a few pieces have survived in Russia. Regarding the palace, and that will be my last slide, the palace was heavily damaged during the Second World War. It was restored, as you can see on the left photo, after the war in a more Soviet style, and to become and host engineer school. And it's now abandoned, as you can see on the bottom left slide. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think I will be happy to take a few questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Nick. I was introducing Nick now. Take it away.
We're all up here at once. Thank you very much, Wilfried, for your terrific lecture. It was really exciting to hear everything. I am just taking this opportunity to thank everybody for tuning in this afternoon for our 5th Second Saturday lecture, and to remind you that we would very much appreciate your support. We're grateful for any help that you can offer so that we can continue to bring these programs to you for free. And if you look in the chat section, I have provided you with a link where you can go and donate $10, $20, $30, whatever you think. Thank you so much for your help. I'm going to pass you back over to Hannah to manage the question and answer section.
All right, thank you very much, Nick. So Wilfried, time for the Q&A. I see a few questions on the screen which were answered during the lecture, and I will denote that we will have access to all of your questions following this lecture, and we can compile them, send them along, and etc. So thanks to all of those who have already asked some questions, and I see quite a few trickling in. So apologies if we do not get to you during the remaining time, but we will try our best to give a comprehensive overview to these wonderful questions. So Wilfried, first off, a lot of thank yous, a lot of fantastic lectures, a lot of I wish that this were longers. So that's always lovely to hear. Now, one question that I saw is, what is your favorite Olga anecdote? What is your favorite story if you had to choose one?
All right. Okay, so there are many anecdotes, but I really like how she's really, to me, she was a very modern woman who was fighting for her position, and it tells a lot about the position of women in the late 19th century, early 20th century, even as a member of the aristocracy. And she really wanted to be with him, and she did a lot for that. And in her correspondence, sometimes the tone she has with Grand Duke Paul is quite interesting and tells a lot about her strength and her willingness of making this happen. And it was definitely a love story, but there are many aspects. I think there is like this very serious aspect that I like about the anecdote. And she said, technically I don't have the words and it's in French, but it's really like, just do it, move. I mean, take responsibility, because save me and my children from my social downfall is like what she will say in one letter to him before, like when she was still married and she couldn't get the divorce. That was one thing. And the other thing is like more like the light, I mean, the sort of shopping aspect, and how she will spend 6 hours, trying a new outfit in one of the most fashionable fashion designer, and complaining about it, saying like, it's horrible, it's like 6 hours, how can it be? And I mean, no one forced her to go and buy a dress from this, I will say, fashion. So these two aspects, I will say. So but yeah.
All right, wonderful, thank you. So next question here is a conglomerate of a few inquiries. So first off, I'm going to ask, are there any descendants of the family here? And did any of the descendants ever receive any of the jewelry, clothing, other items that belonged to their mother?
Yes, there are descendants, and some are mostly, most of them are in France, and some in the US, as far as I know. And she was able actually to save some of her jewels, some of her objects, some of the collection. She actually bought back some objects from the auction. And also she had friends who bought objects from the sale for her. But many of them have been sold on a regular basis since then. So they are still mostly archives of documentation, and I was fortunate enough to have access to some of them in France, especially. But yes, some, but not much. But yes, there is some objects, some documents, some photos, but not big jewels.
All right, thank you. So final question to wrap things up today is actually a little bit about your book and the Yusupovs. Would you mind giving the audience just a little bit of a glimpse into what that story will be and what that book will be?
So the Yusupov book is actually a project, again, was born while I was writing on my PhD. So the idea is to focus on the older generation of the Yusupov, from Prince Nikolai Borisovich to Prince Felix Felixovich Yusupov, and explore their taste and interest for French art and culture, and with a special focus on Princess Zinaida Ivanovna, who actually built the mansion I showed you today, which later became Olga and Paul's mansion in Paris.
Thank you, Wilfried, for a wonderful lecture. I am Michael Perekrestov, the Executive Director of the Russian History Museum, and we're so pleased to have Wilfried with us today. Wilfried has visited our museum several times, and I wanted to reference something that he spoke about earlier today about the discovery of an album of photographs of Grand Duke Paul's palace. And we were preparing to lend some pieces for Wilfried's exhibition on Faberge Rediscovered at the Hillwood Museum. And so this was Wilfried's first time in Jordanville looking at our collection. And he said, "Oh, by the way, do you have anything? You wouldn't happen to have anything related to Grand Duke Paul, would you?" And I said, "Well, actually, yes, we do. We have this album with photographs from his palace." So the moral of the story is that you never know what kind of gems you're going to find here at this museum. So I encourage everyone who is attending today to continue visiting us virtually through these second Saturday lectures, as well as in person whenever the time comes and the opportunity arises. I also wanted to do a little plug for Wilfried's books. The first one, of course, being the one on Princess Paley. And I cannot recommend it because I have not read it, because I do not read French. But I am sure that for those of you who do read French would enjoy it very much. And we do have some of the photos from that album published in the book. So it's incredibly gratifying for us to be able to share these and to contribute to the most recent cutting-edge research on the imperial family and its collections. And then the second book I wanted to showcase is the Faberge Rediscovered exhibition catalog, which was authored by Wilfried. And we also contributed to this through the lending of certain objects, such as this presentation frame from Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich. So I encourage you to look these books up on Amazon, as well as the Hillwood online gift shop. And thank you again to all of you for joining us today. Thank you again, Wilfried. I hope that you will join us next month on November 14th for our next second Saturday lecture, which will be presented by Dr. Natalie Zelensky. And she will be speaking about the Russian émigré music scene in New York. So we're very much looking forward to that lecture. And again, thank you, Wilfried, from all of us at the Russian History Museum. And thank you to all of you who attended. Have a wonderful weekend.